Welcome to another episode of the Udemus podcast. This one is all about being a life drawing model. I'm actually doing a live stream right now on YouTube. It's a Patreon exclusive, so if you would like to join in on future live streams of podcast recordings, make sure you join our Patreon group at patreon.com/udemusart. Link will be in the description of this episode. And if you have any questions about any of it, feel free to shoot me a DM on any social media at udemusart. All right, so for the last maybe 3-ish months, I have been doing a lot of life modeling for local drawing and sculpture groups here in Wellington, New Zealand. This has been something that I never really expected to be doing. I never, of course, said, I would never do that, because when I was in art school studying in Hong Kong, my life drawing classes were definitely some of my favorite classes. And I think once I got the opportunity to do that here, I was almost excited in a way, because I knew how important it was for, I guess, honing my artistic abilities to have an actual real life flesh and blood person in front of me, rather than just a still life, to be able to see it in a three-dimensional context rather than just a picture on a screen or something like that. So it was very exciting for me to start doing it. And I've been posting every week, a couple times a week, all of the sketches that I am able to take pictures of from members of these classes that I model for. And that has been very popular with people who follow me on Instagram and even on Facebook. So a lot of you had questions about what it's like to be a nude life drawing model, and this episode is where I'm going to answer all of them. So the first one is a pretty basic question. How did I get into it? So here in Wellington, I have a friend who used to live with someone who does life modeling as well. And her roommate, who was a life model, was away one weekend, and my friend messaged me and said, hey, my roommate is gone, and there's a sculpture class that needs a life model. Would you be able to do that? So I said, sure, why not? I'm not doing anything on Saturday, so might as well. So I ended up going. It was a 5-hour class, and what pose was it? I can't remember exactly which pose it was. I think it was a pretty basic pose. It was, I was sitting on what kind of looked like a little stool. It was actually a wooden block. And then I had my feet propped up against the side of it on the ground. And then I was kind of slouched over, and I had my arms in between my legs. So I wasn't sitting on the straight side of the wooden box. I was sitting on kind of the corner. So the corner was, between my knees. And then I was kind of slouched forward. I was letting my arms hang down between my knees. And I held that pose for about 5 hours. I will get into more details about what breaks and how long each, little segment of the classes in just a minute. So that was my first experience, and that was pretty nerve-wracking because I had never done modeling before. And the funny thing was, the platform that I was sitting on was actually rotating. And so every 5 minutes or so, someone would come up and they would rotate the platform. That way, all of the artists got a chance to see me from a different angle. And that was really important, obviously, because they're sculpting me. So they could, really pay attention to the dimensions of my body, And they kept telling me to slouch more and more. I was like, I am slouching. I'm slouching as much as I can. They're like, no, you're not. Your back is really straight. So that was the day that I learned that I'm not very good at slouching. And I guess that might be, is my back strong? I don't know. I'd like to think it's because my back is strong. So what is a typical session like? Drawing classes are they're different than a sculpture class. So the sculpture classes, like I just mentioned, the ones that I do, last for about 5 hours. And the drawing classes are usually around 2 to 3 hours. And so for the sculpture classes, typically it's on a rotating platform, simply so the artist can see all of the dimensions, as I mentioned before. But for the drawing classes, I'm typically just on a little stage. There are heaters pointed at me. Some places where I go, there can be up to 3 heaters pointed at me, which is a bit much. Sometimes I get too hot, but that's okay. I'd rather be too hot than too cold. So generally we start with, for the drawing classes, we start with about 5 2-minute poses, and that's so the artist and also myself can warm up. Then from the 2-minute poses, we go into about 4 5-minute poses. From there, we go into about 3 10-minute poses. And by then, that amounts up to an hour. Then we have a little longer break, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then we start with the long pose. Now, in some classes, we will do the same pose for the next hour in about 2 20-minute segments and maybe a 15-minute. In some of them, we do 20-minute poses, but they're all different positions. So it just depends on where I am and how the class operates. So those are pretty much the differences between the sculpture classes and the drawing classes. You know, the sculpture class, I'm obviously holding the same pose the entire time. The drawing classes, I do need to change poses depending on, you know, how long the pose is going to be. Do I practice beforehand? Yes. Usually when I am changing, or rather unchanging, I look in the mirror, in the bathroom mirror, and I'll practice at home too, but especially if the bathroom has a mirror at the places where I model, I will look in the mirror and I will kind of move my body around in different ways and try to think of different shapes that I can make with my body, paying attention to negative space, such as if you put your hand on your hip, you see the negative space between your arm and your body right there in the crook of your arm. So negative shapes like that are really important, as well as, you know, the more solid shapes, such as if I'm putting all of my weight on one leg, how is my pelvic region kind of shifted to one side, or how do the muscles sit differently in my relaxed leg, you know, as opposed to the one that I'm putting all of my weight on. So these are things that I take into consideration. I do practice in my room. My room is very small. My room is about the size of a closet, so I cannot really move around that much, but I can practice standing poses or very aligned, you know, nothing too dynamic in here. So I do as much as I can here at home. And then I also pay attention to body movements of people while I'm out walking on the street. I look at people in conversation, you know, in stores or in the supermarket, and I look at how they're standing and I think, oh, maybe I could do that. And then also for the drawing classes, when I'm standing on stage, there are people kind of usually in like a half circle around the stage. And so even if I did the exact same pose, once facing left and once facing right and once facing, straight on, or even if I turn around so they can see my back, those are all completely different perspectives of the same pose. So sometimes I will shift a pose, just slightly, but completely change direction, because that gives them a really different perspective on my body. So now I'm going to get into some questions that you people wanted to know. These are questions from my Patreon community, from my Instagram community, and some people just privately message me on other platforms. So what was my first impression of life modeling when I got into it? I'm going to be honest. When I first got into it, I was fully expecting there to be a couple of creeps in the group. I'm like, there's always a couple of creeps in the group, right? But actually, so far, maybe there have been, but no one has made any direct creepy remarks on me. People are generally very respectful. And I realize that, the people who go to life drawing classes, because they're not free, they cost money, and you bring your own supplies, and those, I guess the creeps aren't really going to be in an environment like that. Because also when you're drawing someone, who's right in front of you in a life drawing context, you're kind of viewing them as more of an object in a way. Like, you're cognizant that they're a human, but you're fully in your drawing and you're looking to expand your skill with drawing. So, you're kind of looking at them like an object to help your skill improve. And so I guess the creeps are probably not going to be in an environment like that. Now, I'm not in people's heads. I don't know what they've thought. But so far, there hasn't been anyone who has, made any creepy remarks or anything. I've got a wooden bookcase in front of me, so I'm going to knock on it, that there will not be any creeps in any groups that I'm modeling for, or that anyone's modeling for, because it's an art class. It is not it's not speed dating, and it's definitely not professional to make a move on someone who is there hired in a professional environment. So I was very immediately impressed by how people were so respectful, and they were fully immersed in their art. And then during break times, they would come talk to me, and they would carry on a normal conversation like a normal person, because we're all normal people. And newsflash, we all have bodies. Side note, I really apologize for any noise in the background. I live in a building that has some loud people. I live in a place that used to be a hostel, and now all of the rooms have been converted into private rooms. The walls are very thin, and people like to slam their doors and talk very loudly. So I'm doing the best I can. It's pretty quiet in the middle of an overcast day here. So I just apologize if you hear anything weird or loud in the background. All right, next question. What happens if I need to pee? Okay, so if I need to pee, there are plenty of chances for me to pee. So like I mentioned, generally for the drawing classes that last 2 hours, the first hour is the 2-minute, the 5-minute, the 10-minute, and the 10-minute poses. And so after all of that, that's an hour. So I generally make sure I go to the bathroom before that. But for the longer poses, the 20-minute ones for the last hour, after every 20 minutes, or the last 15 minutes I've meant, we take little breaks, 5 minutes. And generally I'm not doing a pose that is too strenuous, for the drawing classes at least. So there are plenty of chances for me to pee. I do drink a lot of water to stay hydrated. So I definitely do take advantage of that sometimes. For the sculpture classes, those can be a bit more strenuous poses, but I still hold them for 20 minutes at a time, and then we have a little 5-minute break where I do my stretching. I stretch a lot because otherwise my back is going to get even more screwed than it already is, and my joints often just everything in my body pops, and so it's really important for me to be able to be flexible. So I am in the habit of stretching multiple times a day, not for like 20 minutes, but just little stretches, especially since I work from home and I'm often working in my room where there's not a desk, it's just the bed. So stretching is really, really important. So this leads into the next question. How long do I hold the poses? Yeah, and I did already touch on that. There's the 2-minute poses, the 5, 10, 20, or sometimes 15 poses. I have held poses for 40 minutes before, but those were not poses that put my body under any immense amount of stress. Everybody in the groups are very respectful of that some poses might not be comfortable to hold. So generally in the beginning, I'll do some more dynamic poses, especially for the 2 and the 5 minute. I won't mind putting something, like my arms above my head or something. If I'm putting them straight up in the air, I'll try to grab onto the overhead lamp that is lighting me, because that'll at least kind of give my arms something stable to hold on to. But anything more than 5 minutes, I won't do anything that restricts my blood flow or, that could cause my muscles, to cramp up or anything like that. So all of this you do have to take into consideration if you're a life model. Okay, so do the classes focus on different parts of the body? And the second part of that question comes from one of our beautiful Patreon members. During life modeling, does the teacher coach you on what the class session is meant to achieve? So this really depends on the class. One of the places where I model most often, they're very anatomy focused. And so they will focus specifically on different parts of the body. So the first time I went there, we were focusing on the pelvis. And so I would, the poses were typically, shifting my weight on different legs or bending my legs in a way that kind of makes my pelvis tilt to one side or forwards or backwards or something like that. Another time it was the tibia and fibula in your leg and that front part of your foot. So, there are classes that do focus on certain types of the body, and I am in communication with the guide or the teacher for those classes the whole time. It's not like they can't talk to me. Like, obviously, I'm just right there in front of them on a stage. And so I'll say, does this look okay? And the teacher will stand in different places in the room and make sure that everyone has, full visibility and say, okay, maybe, tilt a little more to that side, and I will. So we will do some fine tuning to poses. That's mostly if they are longer poses, like the 20-minute ones, because those drawings are obviously going to be much more detailed than the 5 or 10-minute drawings. Am I sore afterwards? Sometimes. With the sculpture classes that last about 5 hours, depending on the pose, I'm usually a bit sore afterwards. But like I said, I drink a lot of water and I stretch a lot. Like every single break, I'm doing some stretches, especially through the hip area and my hamstrings as well. And then also my obliques. And that really helps. It genuinely helps a lot. And there were times that I didn't stretch on my breaks and I was really, really sore for days afterwards. So stretching a lot really helps. And I am glad that I made a habit of doing that. My back is still totally screwed though, as I mentioned before. Like I don't even want to touch my back. I don't even want to go to get a back massage because of all the knots in it. But I feel fine. I'm not aware of it. So, yeah, I do what I can. Do I ever tell myself this is the last time I'm ever doing this? Not really. I'm going to be honest. Not really. I really, really love being a life model. I think it's probably one of my favorite jobs that I've ever done. There are some poses that I make a mental note to never do again. But in terms of actually being a life model, no, I never tell myself I'm never doing this ever again. How did I learn to stay so still while modeling? I don't think that I ever really had to learn it. Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think that I ever had to learn it. It did take a bit of practice, and I definitely have gotten a lot better at holding very, very still. They're not going to get mad if you break the pose for just a minute to like scratch an itch or brush some hair out of your eye, or, if I am doing a longer pose that is more dynamic, and maybe the blood is rushing out of my arm or something like that, I can put my arm down. I can rest it, and they don't mind at all as long as I don't keep it there the whole time, just until the blood comes back, and then I'll put it back. I have definitely felt my body get stronger the more I do life modeling. And with that has come, I feel like, a better ability to stay very, very still while holding the poses. How much does it pay? It pays pretty well. It doesn't pay like $100 per class, but it's enough that I can pay rent if I do it, 3 times a week. That's actually my next question. How often do I do it? In general, I'm booked anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. Because I model at, I think, 4 or 5 different locations around Wellington. So there are some weeks, obviously, it's not guaranteed, where I'm only booked once, or, it's quite rare that I have a week where I'm not booked for any classes at all. So generally it's 2 to 4 times a week. Most of the time 2 or 3. How has life modeling changed your perception of artist? Well, I think that because I went to art school and I did take several life drawing classes, it has helped me understand it's kind of like doing photography modeling. I'm so used to being behind the camera or behind the paper or the canvas that it does help expand me creatively and also help me understand the craft from a different perspective, literally. I always had a lot of respect for the models in my life drawing classes. And now that I'm doing it, it is very, very different than photo modeling because you're holding the poses for so long. So it has given me a new respect because I am also seeing a lot of the same artists go to several different groups around the city. And so I've gotten to know a lot of them. I'll see them at one studio and then I'll see them in another studio, and, you kind of get to know each other. So I really admire the dedication of people who really, really want to improve their skill and be able to accurately portray the life in front of them onto paper in a realistic way. I love this question. Okay. If life modeling was a book, would it have trigger warnings? And I think in some cases it might. Because there is I feel like a misconception about the type of body that people who do life modeling have. And that's the thing. It is not fashion modeling, which shouldn't be a specific body type anyway, but that's another topic for another time. It is about life, and so anybody with a body can be a life model. I was an athlete, and I come from an athletic family, so I have an athletic physique. I'm also really active. And so I feel like, how do I phrase this? I think that when people find out that I'm a life model simply because I have a little more of an athletic physique, they think that only people with what is societally deemed as a good body, which doesn't really make sense to me, but again, another topic for another time. And they say, oh, I couldn't do that. Well, again, just like I said, anybody with a body could do that, but I'm aware that different body shapes could spark some negative self-talk or negative thought patterns in people, because our relationships with our bodies can be quite skewed sometimes for many reasons, whether it's because of society or not. So me personally, how has life modeling altered my relationship with my body? As someone who, in my younger years, teenage and early 20s, my, I guess, anxiety and never really feeling like I fit in manifested in self-hatred in the form of typically trying to control what I eat and how active I was. It can be difficult sometimes. I'm not going to lie. Especially the fact that every artist sees what's in front of them in a different way. And so even the people who can draw basically photoreal drawings, they will still look at me posing in front of them and draw it through their own lens just a bit. And so afterwards, when I look at the sketches, seeing myself portrayed in so many different ways, some are very small and narrow, and some are, larger and wider. And it can be confusing sometimes, psychologically. So I think it has helped me in a way to be grounded in myself and understand that I'm so much more than this meat suit that I'm wearing. But it is a struggle sometimes, simply because I also get sucked into, oh, that person has a good body, or, I should look like this or whatever. Does that actually change the way I live? No, it doesn't, because I have fought those negative thoughts for so long and been through so much stuff in my life, particularly this year. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's my huge post on my Patreon that's quite secret, called The Truth About Where I've Been for the Last Several Months. And I published that a few months ago. And that was telling all of my deepest secrets about what I've been through this year. I've been through enough that I've learned to be very grounded in who I am and not in how I look. And that doesn't mean I don't care about how I look. Like, obviously I do. But I understand that I am so much more than the way I look and how an artist portrays my body in these classes. yeah, there's a lot to talk about on that topic in future episodes. But because we've been going for half an hour now, I'm going to bring this episode to a close. So, if you have made it this far, I hope that some of your most burning questions about life modeling and being a life model have been answered. I highly encourage you, if you live in a place where actually, I don't think anybody lives in a place right now during COVID where it's safe unless you're in New Zealand. But regardless of where you live, I encourage you to do some drawing, do some visual art. Even if you say, I'm not good at it, try to think about, but aside from whether you deem your skill level good or not, do you enjoy it? Skill level aside, do you enjoy making art? And if the answer is yes, which sometimes is a hard answer to arrive at, then you should definitely make some art, because I'm just getting back into it after a very long time of not doing it, and I can tell you, I feel so much better. You will never regret making art. All right. This episode was sponsored by the beautiful Sarah. And thank you so much to all of our Dark Red and Gin and Tonic Patreon members, Rach, Katie, Doc, and Carol. Talk to you again next week. All right. Don't forget to follow us at Redemus Art everywhere online, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/redemusart.